This week we've been looking at a story that is all about grace. It's a story in which Jesus gives grace a face. It's the face of a father who loves his children even when they want nothing to do with him. It's the face of a father who loves his children when they come crawling back and welcomes them back into the family. It's a father who loves his children even when they resent the love that he has for other children. And of course, the biggest and the most important lesson that we need to take away from this story is that we are the ones who need this kind of grace from our God. We need this grace because we are the ones who have wandered away. We need this grace so that we are welcomed back as children rather than servants. We need this grace because sometimes we too can get upset at the grace that God shows others. And yet, of course, we're not alone. There are lots and lots of people that we come into contact each and every day who need this grace too. People who are still perfectly content to live off all of the Father's blessings without wanting anything to do with the Father. People who maybe want to come back but think that they need to earn their way back into God's favor. People who think that their status as God's children is somehow tied to their behavior, and so they are constantly looking down at people who don't measure up. Lots and lots of people who, just like you and me, need to see this face of grace. And yet, believe it or not, long before we might ever have an opportunity to tell them about God's grace, the face of grace that they might have an opportunity to look into will be ours. It's no surprise that as Jesus went around talking about this radical concept of grace, that he also urged his followers to put this same grace into practice, to love people who hated them, to treat people well who treated them poorly, to give to people who could not possibly pay them back. And aside from this just being a natural response to the grace that God shows us, Jesus also talked about one incredible blessing that would also result. He said, "Love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High." You probably know that very often you can look at a child and sort of figure out who his parents are. Maybe it's based on how they look, their nose, their eyes, their smile. Maybe it's in their behavior, their mannerisms and their movements, the words that they use and the tone of their voice. Well, Jesus says that in the very same way as we show grace to others, we are, at least in some small part, bearing a family resemblance to our Father in heaven. We are showing ourselves to be His children. And what a blessing that would be to someone who has never heard about grace or is still struggling to understand it. That they would come into contact with us, that they would see our behavior, and they would get a glimpse of what our Father in heaven is like. That they would look at us and they would see a face of grace.